Before we get into today's podcast, I wanted to tell you guys about PicDrop. PicDrop is an image transfer tool I've been using personally for over 5 years now. It's how I send all my photos to my clients, and I can create custom galleries online, which I can access on my laptop, mobile phone, on the go, where I can download files. It's just a really intuitive platform that was actually designed by photographers with photographers in mind. So they really understand what photographers need when they're delivering photos to clients. And they're constantly updating the platform with new tools and things you can use to just kind of streamline your workflow and make it easier when sending your photos to clients. They have a cool new scribble tool. So if you're working with a retoucher or a client, they can make notes on your photos and really just make it easy to communicate with your client and keep everything in one spot. I can't recommend it enough. It's just, for me, it's a lot better than some of the more outdated platforms like WeTransfer and Dropbox. It's just a very specific transfer tool for photographers in mind. So with today's podcast, with the promo code BANTER, you'll get 2 months free of PicDrop. All you got to do is go over to picdrop.com, enter the promo code BANTER, and you'll get 2 months free. So definitely go give it a try. Let me know what you guys think. And without further ado, we'll get into today's episode. Welcome back to the Photo Banter Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gagne. And on today's podcast, I welcome on photographer Todd Glaser. Todd Glaser is a photographer based in San Diego, California. He spent over 10 years as a staff photographer for Surfer Magazine. And on today's episode, I speak to Todd about his new book published by Rizzoli, documenting his over 15 years photographing world-renowned pro surfer Kelly Slater, an 11-time world champion. Just an amazing body of work that not only just documents the surfing, the action, but just kind of behind-the-scenes look of Kelly Slater's life, travels all around the world. So I was excited to talk to Todd about his kind of approach to photography and surfing and just kind of his history with photography and this kind of the process of putting the book together and much, much more. Todd's a guy who's just always shooting, is traveling the world with the best surfers and making amazing imagery in the water. So it was a real pleasure getting a chance to speak with him. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And if you're interested in buying a copy of Todd's book, I'll put a link to his website. It's still available. I picked up a copy myself, and it's a really amazing book, so can't recommend it enough. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy this one, and thanks so much. There we go. All right, Todd Glaser, excited to have you, man. Long time coming. We've been going back and forth, I think, for like 6 months or something. But coming up,
Yeah,
your book coming out. It's blurred here, but your new book, Kelly Slater, by Rizzoli, which is still available. Excited to have you, man. How does it feel to have this book out now?
man, thanks so much for having me and thanks for being so accommodating on the schedule as well. It's been a little bit of, like we were just saying, a little bit of a balancing act between chasing waves and making a book and family life and holidays. It's like a couple days after Thanksgiving right now, and we just we hosted Thanksgiving. So that was our first time hosting, which is a whole new set of challenges.
Yeah, man.
Almost like making a book, but a little bit different.
How does it
But
feel
yeah,
just to have the book out and like how's the response been from people getting in their hands now?
it feels good to have the book out. It's kind of nerve-wracking, because this collection of work is it's like, I guess you could call it work, but it's almost more of like a visual diary of the last 15, 17 years or so. So it's kind of like an extended photo album, more than it is like we never set out to like make a photo book. We both really love chasing waves, and I love to surf waves and I love to photograph waves, and Kelly really loves to surf waves. And um, through, I don't know, a series of chance and mutual friends and a shared passion for the ocean, 15 years later, we're still chasing waves and making photos and making films. And um, yeah, so it's really cool to have a book, but it's also very odd because like since we've made the book, we're still traveling a lot, and we're still trying to find new waves, and we're in different chapters of our lives. And so I think this period of the book of a decade and a half is really special because it's a bit of a timestamp for those moments. It's essentially an intimate look of Kelly's life from his 10th world title to just before the birth of his first son.
Yeah, it's amazing work, and it must have felt good because, as you know, like when you're shooting, you're actively out there shooting work and making work. A lot of times, it's just on to the next shoot, on to the next thing. So it must have felt good to like sit down and kind of actually have the time to spend and look at what you created for the last 15 years. Was it even for yourself to be able to look back and see like how your work kind of evolved over the last 15 years? Was that kind of like a good experience for you?
Yeah, it's it's an interesting experience because I feel like when Kelly and I met, I was when we first met, I was a photography student and I was up in Santa Barbara studying photography, and then we ended up kind of crossing paths in different parts of the world as I was working for Surfer Magazine as a staff surf photographer, and we would cross paths and see each other around, and we'd say our quick hellos, and then I got hired by Quicksilver in 2010. And the day after I got hired, the very next day, I went on a trip with Kelly. They're like, okay, the phone rang. Kelly wants to go here. Get ready to go. And I was super nervous, and it was kind of a real fast introduction to surfing, not only on the highest level, but traveling at that fast of a pace and at that, um, I guess you could say last minute. Like at that time, this was right in the middle of Kelly's 10th world title campaign. He was very borderline moment to moment, like hyper present. And you'd wake up and go, oh, the waves are going to be good in Fiji. Like we're going to Fiji tonight. And you just have to be ready to go, bags packed at the door, waiting for the phone call. Um, and from the very first time that we shot together on a trip, we really kind of we bonded over that shared passion of chasing waves, but also you know, I love the way that he surfed, and he, I guess he liked the way that I photographed him surfing. I kind of approached it like here's this amazing opportunity to capture, one of the greatest athletes of all time, one of the greatest surfers of all time, but more importantly, just a really, really passionate surfer. And how can I show that, and how can I tell that story?
Yeah,
Um,
because I
and
think at the beginning of the book you have, I think the first photo you took of him. Because in the book, I think you wrote like you're out in the water and you saw him, and you're like, "Hey, can I take your portrait?" And that was basically your first time kind of interacting with him, pretty much.
Yeah, I was in a portrait class at photography school in Santa Barbara in 2007. And I went out with a buddy of mine, and this was when I was still shooting film. And I'd shot surfing quite a bit because I grew up surfing, and I was using my friends. It was a borrowed housing and camera because I didn't know Kelly was going to be there, but I'd always just shot with a fisheye in the water because that's what like water photographers did is you shot with like a Canon, either EOS 630 or a Canon A2 and a 15 millimeter lens. And you would just shoot in the tube photos. And a buddy of mine that I went to school with, he had a EOS 3 with an 85 millimeter. So I was out testing it out, and I think I shot the first half of the roll a couple days before, and then I went out just at sunset with another friend to shoot half a roll, and Kelly passed by, and I was like, "Hey, man!" And it was funny because I always thought of surfing as like when I was at school, I got a degree in commercial advertising, and so we were shooting everything on 4x5 cameras on field cameras and medium format film. This is kind of pre-digital, and I would shoot my friends surfing just for fun because I never thought you could really make a career out of it. It was just something that I would do when I was done with my assignments. And he came by, and I was like, "Hey, guys," we were talking. We had a mutual friend from the same town that I grew up in, and I was like, "Do you mind if if I shoot a portrait of you?" And he's like, "Sure." And so I shot two frames, and normally I would only shoot one, but
Yeah.
with film, you shoot two. And it was as the sun was setting. I think it was frames like 34 and 35, which is so funny to think because like now you don't really shoot and go, "Oh, I think number 17 is the one." You just kind of go shoot digital images, and then you kind of pick on the back end. But yeah, shot two frames, and the first one was the very first one that we shot together.
Were you always like comfortable like starting out as a photographer, like approaching people to like take their picture and that sort of thing, or do you feel like you kind of kind of built your confidence the longer you've done it, you think?
No, I was terrified, man.
Yeah,
I
because
was just,
even now, even then, like he was the number one surfer, probably. Like still, like so, it's like he's the guy. Or you grew up like a big fan of his surfing, probably.
yeah, and we had some mutual friends. So I grew up with one of his really good friends, who's a dear friend of mine, Rob Machado. He lives just down the street, and Taylor Steele, who used to make all the films with Kelly. And so we had quite a few mutual friends just from the town I grew up in, and the way that we would all surf together. But yeah, it's funny. Like when I first started out, I used to think, okay, well, if I go swim in these waves and I get the shot in the water, then like maybe I'll have the courage to ask them to shoot a portrait because I always really wanted to be a portrait photographer. That's like the photographers who I always looked up to, even early on, and as I got into photography, were all portrait photographers. And I was so shy that I would use like my water photography as like my foot in the door to get in to shoot portraits. And it felt like it kind of gave me a little bit something to talk about. So I was always like far more comfortable swimming in the ocean, even if the waves were big, than asking to shoot a portrait. And now like it's almost gone the opposite where I'm more comfortable with portraits. And then I was looking at like video of pipeline yesterday and it was really big. And I go, man, I still swim out there, but it gets spookier as you start removing yourself, you know, year by year by how much time you spend over there.
Oh yeah,
Excuse me.
definitely. And that's the cool thing about your book. That some of my favorite photos in the book, and people can go check it out. You have like these great photos. Like there's a picture you guys at a bowling alley, or
Hmm.
and like some other really kind of cool, like in the sauna. This kind of behind the scenes. It's like because it can be easy just to shoot barrels. Like there's tons of that photography, tons of this people coming down a barrel. But like the cool thing about your work is that it's not just the action of photography of the surfing. It's just everything that kind of surrounds the culture of surfing. And have you kind of always had that mindset going into shooting surfing, or did your kind of approach kind of evolve over the years of being a photographer, you think?
I thank you for noticing that and for checking out the book too. I know it was a bit of a last minute one. I totally forgot to ship it to you, and I'm gonna send one your way as well. But so thank you for ordering
Yeah.
it. But um, I always kind of felt like the photographers whom I really looked up to early on were they were all just they were kind of documentary photographers that kind of evolved into portrait photography. Um, and then a lot of them came from like the rock and roll world. And so if you look at surfing or any action sport as a band being on stage, those moments on stage are sometimes give other people opportunities to capture those moments. But I always like looking in the back. And if you're talking like rock and roll, I love seeing like what like a Danny Clinch would do, how
Hmm.
he's like hiding behind the drum set with his Leica and capturing those little moments. And I felt like I had kind of this neat opportunity and responsibility to not only capture the surf action, but what it's like behind closed doors. And like when Kelly and I started photographing and we started shooting together, um, Instagram wasn't a thing. I don't know if Facebook was a thing. I don't, maybe MySpace was around, but we were still shooting film and we were under the impression that you shoot now and it's going to get shared 6 months or a year from now. And so one thing we've always been really conscious of is being respectful of people's personal space and also timing. And I think Instagram has changed that quite a bit, but I have always gone from the ethos of going slow and trying to make images that will be important or memorable 20 years from now, even if I could shoot something this morning and get a big spike engagement this afternoon, and you get that jolt of I don't know if gratitude's not the word, but you get this jolt of adrenaline of just support. Whereas I kind of like the little bit of a slower approach and try to tell that story. And with that slower approach, you have, you can at times build more of a trust, and you can also, continue the access that you have. And it's a lot of with like documentary photography, and what makes some of those photographers so great is knowing when to shoot and then knowing when not to shoot. And like put the camera down and help out and participate. And so I think, there's a lot of photographers in the surf industry that have done that well, and there's a lot that haven't done that well. And
Yeah.
um, that's something I really try to honor and appreciate. I've tried to take this slow approach, and I do that as well when I do, commercial shoots or editorial shoots, but I always want to be respectful of people's time and try to think about it, what it would be like from their point of view to always have a camera around. And so
Yeah.
I try to just be really respectful of that. And one rule I've always kind of like given myself is I've never released an image that I couldn't look the subject in the eye and say, I feel good about this image going out to the world. And
Yeah, it's like being able to read the room, and like when you're photographing people, people are it's like anybody, you, me, whoever. Some days you have good days, some days you have bad days. I'm sure working so closely with Kelly for so long, like you know what days to shoot, what days not to. You know someone's personality, and it's kind of reading that room and knowing when to do it or not, right?
yeah, I mean, how like I looked at your work and I love your portrait work and like in the baseball series that you did. Like, how do you approach it? How do you approach a subject that you've known for maybe 10 years or 15 years? Or how do you approach a subject that you've never met? Like, is it the same process?
I mean, a lot of my work, like all that baseball stuff, was just, yeah, most of the people I didn't know. Like, went to the Dominican Republic and did that project, and I just approached people cold on the street, and I guess it is a different project. I guess I never really thought about that. Like, so much of my work is people that like I have a small interaction with. I've never done. I don't think I've ever done a project like you have, like with one person for 15 years. So it's hard for me to say, but I think it's just like you said, like having respect for that person and like a genuine interest in what they're doing, and not just trying to uh, stick a camera in their face right as you meet them. Like actually have a genuine conversation, because I would imagine you, like someone who's gotten to travel the world so much and meet so many interesting people, it's like the photo's cool, but it's really kind of getting to meet these people and learn about their lives, and kind of taking your time and having some patience, I think.
Yeah, but at the same time, like sometimes I'll do an editorial shoot that's even with Kelly, and we'll do it in 5 minutes, or
Hmm.
we'll do it in 10 minutes, and like you know what you need to do, you get it done,
Yeah,
and then the cameras go away, and then you're like, all right,
got
let's
it.
go surfing.
Yeah,
And
that's a good challenge too.
for us, surfing's always been the outlet. Like the surfing part's never felt like work. And Kelly is like he's been on the world tour longer than anyone, and I think collectively over the last 15 years, we've maybe been to 10 contests together. I was always the one that as soon as the contest was over, I would jump on a plane and meet him to go try and find good waves, because contests are, when you win, it's amazing. And when you lose, it sucks. And
Hmm.
and it's there's these like series of highs and lows that go along with it. And it's with Kelly and I, it's not like if I went to go photograph a baseball team, I'm not as personally invested into that team.
Hmm.
Even though I love the sport, I don't uh, yeah, I just don't have that same connection. To me, it would be interesting to like follow one player as they like wake up, make their oatmeal, do their stretches,
Yeah,
and kind of give that like visual narrative from behind the scenes as to what it's like leading up to the game. And then as soon as they walk into the stadium, almost stop shooting
yeah,
and let the baseball photographers handle that.
yeah.
And I've kind of like that's the way I've kind of approached surfing is like do all the free surf trips, try to discover new waves, try to, you know, hang out with friends, and there's a lot more of like the natural highs that way. And being around a contest when someone wins, it's amazing, but when they lose, like it sucks. And you can feel that energy, and it sucks to be around your friends when they're bummed. And
Yeah.
so typically around a swell chase, it's more fun just to, everyone's happy.
Well, also this from a visual art standpoint, the contest, everyone's got jerseys on with like logos and shit. So like this from like a visual art standpoint, I'm like, I don't, those pictures don't speak to me. I want to see like the raw, like this real like surf session stuff, you know?
Totally. And like you see it in other sports, and like you can kind of see it a little bit in the work in the book. Like the majority of the work is backlit or it's
Hmm.
underwater.
Yeah.
And so many times when people get the opportunity to photograph someone like Kelly, they want to make sure they see his face, and they want to make sure they show the color of the board shorts and what surfboard he's riding. And like we do that when we have to,
Hmm.
you know, show a product, but I'm more interested in trying to create a series of images that are timeless that you can't necessarily tell what year it is based on the length of their shorts or the color of their t-shirt or the color of their shorts. And to me, that is what makes it fun. It also makes it challenging and can drive some like companies crazy because they want to make sure that you see the
Show the
product.
product, show the product.
But it's like, hey, unless you sent us here specifically to go do this
Yeah, yeah,
product, like we're gonna go do the best version of us. And like, I'm
yeah.
sorry, it's like kind of yeah, it's up to us. And you see that a lot like in skating too. Like
Hmm.
I grew up skating a little bit, nothing to like the level of what you did or some of the guys that you've
Yeah,
had on the show. But you, you look at like you look at the old skate films and you see all the high eight footage and then you see someone like a French Fred or like a a Blayback and then it's the shot of the guy sitting there laying down passed out because he's tired because he can't land the stair set and like
yeah,
those are the moments that are actually far more memorable than the victories. And so it's like you want to capture those tiny off moments more than you got to capture the victory because
yeah.
that's what gets your foot in the door and you got to capture the peak action really well. But if you can do that, then how do you push yourself to capture kind of those quieter moments?
Yeah. And one thing that's cool about the book is like for me, I've only just started to learn a little bit. I don't surf like but I've gone to the North Shore the last 3 years, and, like kind of learn a bit about the surf culture and the community. With your book is it's cool. You don't even need to be a surfer to read it, and you kind of get to learn a lot. Like there's like some pictures that you shot of Kelly like in his kitchen making breakfast, and you kind of talk about how, like you're saying, there's a lot of times in between the wave where you're this downtime and kind of this waiting for the wave to come. So there's this a lot of time, like we were saying, moments to photograph outside of the wave.
Yeah, thank you. And it's funny, like with that book, I would say 80% of those photos were shot not on assignment.
Yeah.
Those were literally phone calls like, hey, the waves are going to be really good in Fiji. Like, should we go? And I'm like, yeah, dude, I'll see you at the airport tonight. Like, let's go. And then, or he'd be like, hey, pipeline's going to be good. Him and his partner, Kalani, would invite me to come stay at their house. And so I've been staying with them for the last 10 years or so in Hawaii. And you do your best to be a good house guest and you clean the house and you take the trash out and you do grocery food runs and I feel like I'm an extended part of their family and they are to us as well. And you just kind of blend in a little bit. And when the moment's right, you snap a couple photos and then you go on with the day. Like I think for the last 8 or 9 years, we've all picked out Christmas trees together.
That's funny.
And and I have photos of it, but it just didn't quite fit the book. But of course I shoot it
Yeah.
and I go through phases like I mentioned like Danny Clinch before. I went through my like a M6 phase where I have like
It,
M6 with a 35 millimeter and the Tri-X, and that's all I have. And then yeah, you go through these little phases and like I can see it visually in the book of where I got super hyped on shooting film and then other moments where I was like, okay, I gotta have a Hasselblad because like the Hasselblad is like, the portrait camera. And then you go through phases where like I just want to shoot underwater photos. And so I can kind of see an arc in my work of like what got me excited and what how you choose to capture different moments.
yeah, I think it's what keeps it interesting about photography is trying new things, and especially when you're first starting, it's just like trying to figure out who you are as a photographer. Only way you're gonna find out is just trying new stuff. It might be cameras or whatever you're shooting or whatnot. I was gonna ask you about the Hasselblad because you brought that thing in the ocean because there's no housing for a Hasselblad. You had like some portraits of Kelly like in the ocean. You just brought that thing out there.
Oh, so yeah, well, I didn't bring it. Well, I guess I kind of brought it in. It was like chest deep. I'm pretty short,
Okay.
so it was like chest deep. So for anyone like taller than me, it probably would have been waist deep.
Hmm.
But yeah, I kind of went through this phase of like, and I don't know if you've gone through this in your photography career, but you kind of I feel like every couple of years you go through this phase of like, oh man, like I bought that Hasselblad from a friend of mine that I went to school with. And it was at the time when everyone was going into when everyone was like getting into digital. I think the 5D had just come out.
Oh yeah.
And so people were like hyped on the 5D and they're like, digital is the greatest thing ever. Like forget film and all this stuff. And I'm like, you guys are tripping. Like, film's the shit. And when we were at school, we still had a dark room and all our assignments were on 4x5 film. So like, I'm sure going from that transition from 4x5 field camera to all of a sudden being able to shoot digital, everyone was like, see a film? Like I got that Hasselblad from a friend of mine for $250. I'm like, which now they're worth so much and it's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I used to pack for trips and I would always treat every trip like it was going to be the last one. So I'd have like digital camera, backup digital camera, film camera, Hasselblad. Like I went through like the point and shoot phase, like you name it. And I would actually show up to do like a portrait, and all my portraits sucked because like I'd have like seven cameras, all this shit floating around and a light meter around your neck, and you're just like, and I would lose the subject because I would lose myself trying to balance it all, and stuff gets sandy, and you're just what am I even doing? And so that was in my phase where I brought a Hasselblad everywhere, and
Dude,
and it's
I'm fully back on it. I've been shooting the hotspot a lot, and I even just bought a new scanner, so I'm like all in. I just love like for me, it just like slows you down. Like
yeah.
now when I shoot digital, obviously I still shoot digital a lot and whatever, but digital almost feels like you're on your phone, like scrolling, because there's always like you can zoom in, you're like circling back with like, but film it just makes you like focus, and even just the way the cameras feel in your hand and how they sound, it's just like you can't beat it. And obviously, it's just a different look for sure.
It is, but at the same time, like I just got three rolls of film back from the lab a couple days ago, and I shot one at a concert. Excuse me, one a good friend of ours just had their second kid actually yesterday, and last week she's like, "Hey, I know you don't really do like family portraits, but like, could you come and shoot a contact sheet of my family and I? We have a 2-year-old, and then I'm about to pop." And I was like, "Of course." So I went and I shot one roll of Portra 400, and then there was a third roll I found in my desk, and it was like 2 years old of a hike I went on with my wife. And um, I love, I think, I think I love the act of shooting more than I like looking at the photos, which is really weird. And especially with film, like I love shooting the frame and then just like putting the film away and then finding it 5 years later, which like on a commercial aspect isn't very smart or
Yeah.
good, but I've found yeah, like you said, there is a process to shooting film that you're working within these like series of limitations. And you also like when I switched from film to digital, I was kind of forced into it because I had an EOS 1V and I flooded that in the water, and it took me like 5 years to kind of figure out how to tell my story visually with colors because I would go to the beach and I was super into like Ilford 3200. That with a red filter, that with a red 25A was like the shit for years. I loved it so much. And you just get these super grainy images and you print them like, and then I'd blow them up really big. So like the grain was like golf balls and it looked so cool. And it was like so different. They like never got run, but I just thought it was cool. And but I knew what I was gonna do before I shot it. Whereas now you have this so much latitude and you have so many options that I found it really challenging to find my like visual voice through the digital medium until many years later when I just started like stripping things away and just trying to simplify it as much as I could.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. One picture I wanted to pull up. I don't think it made the book, but it's on your website, and I love the picture. It's a picture of let's see here. It's John Florence and Kelly. This
Yeah,
just playing chess. I don't know why this. I thought this picture was great. Like, what's the story behind this picture? Like, where were you guys, and like, what was the story behind this?
thank you. So in 2000, yeah, thank you for checking out my website.
Of course.
So in 2017, there was, or 2000, what was it, 2015, a good friend of mine and a filmmaker, director, Taylor Steele, we were surfing together down at Seaside at the beach we grew up surfing. And he's like, "Hey, I'm thinking about making another film. It's going to be my 25th film. Would you want to make it together?" And we'd already made a couple films together. I'm like, "Let's get a cup of coffee and like let's just talk about it." And so we finished surfing. We drove up the street to this coffee shop called Java Hut that's no longer there. It turned into like some fancy restaurant that just shut down after a year. And we started bouncing ideas and we're like, wouldn't it be cool if we did like a story on like dual generational surfers? Take like an 11-time world champion like Kelly Slater with John Florence, who at the time had no world titles. And we got at the time 5-time world champion Steph Gilmore up against a surfer named Dave Rostovich, who's like one of the greatest surfer watermen in ever, but also he doesn't compete. He was so competitive as a swimmer in his earlier years that he quit competing altogether, even though the guy who he grew up swimming with became an Olympic gold medalist. But he's just this beautiful surfer to watch. And we had Rob Machado with Craig Anderson, and we called this film and Shane Dorian, who's a big wave surfer with Albie Lair, who's like an up and coming big wave surfer, um, and we just started putting these ideas together. We're like, what if we took them to a place that neither one of them had been, and just had a mic the whole time? And as a fan of surfing, what would it be like to be a fan of these guys in within the walls of the room and document them on a surf trip? And so one of the ideas that we had was we were trying to think of different ways to get them to engage when they weren't surfing. And the idea with John and Kelly was, well, what if they played chess? They're both hyper competitive. Chess is a very competitive game. And we thought that that would be a good kind of metaphor for their competitiveness. And then, keep in mind at the time, Kelly had 11 world titles and John had no world titles. So we brought a chessboard. We went way down to the South Pacific and they played a game of chess. And it was funny because we asked John, we're like, hey, John, would you be into playing chess? He's like, yeah, that sounds all right. And didn't say much. And then we're like, Kelly, like, would you be into playing a game of chess? He's like, I don't play much, but if John's down, I'm down. We're like, cool. So we set it up and um, I'm like such like a photography nerd. There's this photo that Walter Eos,
Mm.
do you know who Walter Eos is?
Oh yeah, I've had him on before. Legend.
Okay, so Walter's a really good friend of Kelly's,
Yep.
and I'm good friends with his sons Christian and Bjorn.
Hmm.
And so I've always been a huge admirer of Walter and his work and the family. And actually, like Rare Air was a really big inspiration for the book that we made. And so Walter has this image, I think it's of like Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus in the clubhouse in 1964.
Yep.
I want to say Augusta, but it's not Augusta. And it's like shot with like a 28 mil lens. It's two of them having coffee.
Yep.
You know the photo I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So like that photo is what I had in mind when we shot this image. And so we set it up and then I took a step back and shot a few frames. And um if I'm gonna be totally honest, I shot it with a Leica and I also shot it with a Hasselblad. And it was so dark that the film didn't really come out because I was like hand holding it like a quarter of a second,
Yeah.
even with the film push to stops. But it to me this moment was just kind of a quiet moment between the two, arguably two of the most competitive world champions at the time. And we thought about putting it in, and there was another image of the two of actually where Kelly is duck diving and John's in the tube that we
Yep.
considered putting into the book. And those were images that we just when it came to like the pagination and like the storytelling side of the book, we had to make a series of decisions
Hmm.
and try to we kind of just had to decide what is important and what tells a story that's maybe already there or what just doesn't fit anymore, whether it be by color or by tonality or contrast. And I struggled a lot with that and really relied heavily on Grant Ellis, the who's he was my photo editor at Surfer Magazine for 10 years, and then now he's at the Surfer's Journal. And then Kelly brought in a really good friend of ours, Chris Malloy, to help with the creative direction and also to help with the image selection. So that image was one of the final ones to be cut, but it was designed as a spread, and it was a spread in my previous book.
Yeah, it's just a great picture, and I'm glad I asked because that's a great story. Yeah, because you met like, Walter Yost. He has like some of these iconic photos of like Kelly when he's young, and then like the Irons brothers. Like you started working with Kelly, I think in the book it said around 2010. So you've been
Mhm.
photographing him like regularly for 15 years. Did you kind of? were you aware of all that work back in the day? Did you kind of look at some of the older photos of like Kelly and this kind of surfing kind of growing up, I guess?
I kind of looked at the photos of Kelly, but like I'd seen the early photos of Kelly and I'd read Pipe Dreams. And there's an old film that came out in 91 that was made by Richard Wolcott, who's one of the founders of Volcom, called Kelly Slater Black and White. And it was right when Kelly signed with Quicksilver. And it was like his breakout feature film. And there's one scene in the movie that stands out the most to me. And it's the morning of the finals at Trestles, and it's Kelly shot with a fisheye eating a bowl of cereal. And in all the other films that I've ever seen of Kelly, even including the ones that we've made, I've never seen footage that intimate and that close of him and that tight. And when you talk to Walter, Walter say he was heavily influenced by this book that was made in the 40s of Elvis. Um, and so that shot in particular always kind of stuck out to me. And then there was an image that Art Brewer shot of him where he like has a big smoothie and um, he's drinking a smoothie in mainland Mexico on an early trip. But I, yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I tried to not only capture the surfing as best we could, but give it insight into his kind of crazy world because Kelly would work with photographers, but he wouldn't necessarily like travel with a photographer.
Mm,
Although with when he was with Quicksilver, Jeff Hornbaker w was with him quite a bit. And they captured some cool moments, but I always love the work. Like if you see like the early fashion work of like Dewey Nicks when he would do the Quicksilver campaigns, and they would shoot everything on these big medium format cameras, but then Dewey always had this little like snapshot Yashica T4 contacts or something. And those were the images that always ended up making the campaigns because they were so raw and real. And I was far more attracted to that work than I was the polished heroic images. But I think like Walter's like documentary, like Walter's action work and the work he's done with Jordan was so timeless. And I love that Walter's just like and we would talk about Walter a lot. And we worked on a shoot together. And I was so excited to meet Walter. Everyone was like so excited to meet Kelly. I'm like, I'm with Kelly all the time. Like this is Walter.
a legend, dude.
Yeah, I was so hyped. And I
Yeah.
wanted to get a photo with him. I didn't. I was kind of nervous. We were doing a shoot together for I think it was for Esquire maybe. And and yeah, well, I was just like in awe of like watching and getting to see the way that he worked. And he shot the whole thing in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
He had everything set up and he had assistants help out. And then he was like drinking coffee and helping the assistants set the lights up. But then as soon as Kelly came on the set, he just lit up and I've been around Kelly enough that I can see his inner child light up. And I think that's like the gift of Walter is that he can disarm anyone and just make people feel good and special and warm. And then he gets in, he gets the shot, and he gets out.
Yeah,
And
he's just a incredible body of work. I went out to his house in Montauk a few years back and took his portrait one day, and it was just like the guy's like 80, I think, or and he's just like he's still got the energy of like a 20-year-old, still like excited about photography and like making his like collages and is still out there doing it, which was like really inspiring for me.
yeah, when we were making the book, I would send him a text or call him like maybe every 6 months or a little bit longer. And he would just have these like little snippets of advice that were so helpful that just really kind of because you get stuck. And I think as photographers, it can be a pretty isolating act, even if you're surrounded by a lot of people. And he just had the right words to kind of he'd been there and can kind of get you through that funk and then motivate you to re-look at your work. I think I looked at every single image, not just the selects of like because that's what's so unique. You might do this with your shoots. Is like for me, we'll go on a shoot and we'll go to I don't know, we'll go chase a swell or go to the South Pacific for a week or 2 or 3 weeks, and then you shoot a lot of photos, and then 10 get used, and then you don't look at them again. And in this process of building the book, I would go back and look at every single frame. And what I found is the images that I only shot 1 or 2 frames of, like if my lens was always pointed this way, and then I would go, something would catch my eye and I'd like snap one frame. That one frame is typically what ended up being in the book, more so than the times that I was sitting there trying to like capture the one thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's one thing I was interested in talking to you about because being you've spent a lot of your career photographing surfing. Like, how do you, for instance, like Pipeline, iconic spot, like you've been there a million times and photographed a million times. Like, how do you make it interesting and keep challenging yourself when it's like the same beach, the same wave? Like, how do you, does it ever get monotonous or like how do you kind of keep it interesting for yourself photographically?
Well, the cool thing about surfing is that no two waves are ever the same. And the unique thing about surfing too is you could go out and the guy or girl that you're photographing could have the session of a lifetime, or they could have a total shocker. And so it's not necessarily equal opportunity for them. Just because you're Kelly doesn't mean you're going to go out and have the pick of any wave that you want. And then perhaps he does get a great wave, but a cloud goes over the sun. Now the light's not that good. So even if the wave is great, the light's not that good. How usable is that photo? Or someone takes off on a wave and they're in this big tube and then someone paddles right in front of you and blocks you. Or you're housing fogs or you're out of position. And there's kind of a lot of variables that keep it really exciting and also keep it challenging. Because with surfing, the ocean's moving, you have to have an understanding of the swell and the tide and also the location. But you as a photographer need to be on your game with the photography side of things, but also need to keep yourself safe and use your best judgment of the ocean and the camera and lens that you have to tell the best story that you can. Um, and for me, like I found the best way to do that is to try to get the greatest understanding of what the waves are doing, and then also be hyper selective on when I choose to commit to shoot a photo. Shooting on land's different because it's safe and the ocean's not going to fall on you on land, but in the water, there's a lot more variables to deal with.
And what's like, that's the thing that's interesting about surfing, because like as you know, I came up with skateboarding and shooting skateboarding, where it's like you're at a spot and you're photographing this one skater, but like you're out in the ocean. Like, what's the etiquette amongst like surfers, the photographers in the water? Because like I've been out Pipeline, there's a bunch of people out there. Like, if you're out in the water swimming, are you only photographing like one person, or are you just kind of out there just trying to shoot what you can? And like, how do you kind of navigate just the etiquette of like being out there in the water with the surfers?
No, that's a really good question. And it's funny because in the film days, it was much easier because you had 36 frames. And so it built this natural rotation of you shoot a roll of film, it's 10, 15 minutes to swim in, you run up to a house or your car, whatever it is, you change it, that's a 45-minute lap. And it's a lot of energy too. So you're hyper selective on the frames that you chose to shoot. Digital, you put in a terabyte card and you're out there as long as your battery will last.
Yeah.
Um, there is just like kind of surfing, and there is kind of there is a hierarchy of who gets priority on the waves, and it trickles down amongst the surfers. There is a similar thing that happens in the lineup with the photographers as well. And it's not as extreme as it used to be because it used to be pretty scary. It's still scary as far as the waves go, but there's people that dedicate their whole lives to photographing pipeline.
Hmm.
And in my opinion, they have the right to be in the front lines or where they choose to be. Now, what happens is sometimes you get people that are newer photographers or hyper confident people that are, you know, kind of in the way or not necessarily capturing not where they need to be, but it's getting in other people's way. And it's come to a point where even the surfers will now say something to a photographer if they're getting in the way of the photographer that they're working with to trying to get a shot. Pipeline's a bit of a free for all because there's so many photographers and there's so many people and it's so accessible. I feel like that comes into play a little bit more when you travel to a different destination. Like if you go to Fiji and I show up with Kelly and then there's another crew that shows up with another photographer, you would hope, and typically it's the case, that there's a mutual respect amongst the photographers that, hey, when my person's going,
Hmm.
you dip underwater, and then when your person goes, you dip underwater, and you just try to kind of manage your relationships that way. Pipeline, there are certain people that dedicate their lives to photographing pipeline, and I understand even when I go, I'm a guest, and I would much rather sit back with a little bit of a longer lens and not only stay safer, but like if you want to swim 20-foot pipeline with a fisheye lens, like I've done it. It's terrifying. Like I've
Yeah.
done it and I've gotten good photos and I'm like, I'm good. And I think too, I think like when the magazines were around, there was this nonverbal thing where everyone was really fighting to get a cover shot because a cover meant so much. Now, like you're literally up against people that are vlogging and YouTubing and like going straight to Insta stories. Like
Yeah, a lot of that.
at the end of the day, man, like how much you want to punish yourself for an Instagram post?
Hmm.
Like I don't know if for me with the thought of it getting a cover, it's like you take a little bit more risks, but you hit the reef a few times and you're like, you know what? Maybe I don't know if there's someone younger or you just kind of have to follow your path. Like lately, for the last, I don't know how many years, but in Hawaii, like I've really just hyper focused on Kelly or on beautiful waves. And so, when Kelly would take off on a wave, I would go all in and really try to capture those waves. Or if someone just gets like the wave of the day, you want to shoot that. But I don't know where all the photos go. You'll go to Pipeline, there's 30 photographers out, and I'm
Yeah.
looking around, I'm like, I know three guys or girls. There's another girl that shoots out there,
Well,
Krista Funk.
and the interesting about pipeline, I didn't realize like during this time of the year when it's like the surf season, there's people from all around the world, and that's
Yeah.
like one of the coolest things about it. Going out there, met people from like Australia, Japan, like Europe. It's like everywhere, and it's photographers, surfers, there's people visiting. It's like a really interesting place in the world.
And I think like, currently, like I listened to the Ardo Sorry podcast that you had, and
Mm,
I love that one. And I'm a big fan of Ardo uh, and I love the work that he's doing, and I love his take on the North Shore. But there's been photographers that have been documenting the North Shore in a similar way
hmm
during different generations. Like there was a photographer from New York named Michael Hausband.
hmm
Are you familiar with his work at all?
It sounds familiar. I'll have to look it up again.
Oh man, so he made a book with Joel Tudor called Surf Book. And in my opinion, that's like one of my favorite surf photography books of all time. Michael Hausband was a rock and roll photographer. He has a studio in New York. He um he went to the North Shore and shot everything on black and white film on, Pentax 6.7. And he was in with the culture because of Joel, and he photographed guys like Kelly and Rob and the local communities, but he had kind of that behind the scenes rock and roll approach that was so raw and real, and it's similar to like what Ardo was doing, but it was 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And I love that look and I love that take, and I think the North Shore has so much energy. And but when you're hyper focused on capturing the action, it's hard to remove yourself. Like Ardo might not look at Pipeline and think he's ever going to go swim out there when it's 20 feet because
Yeah.
that's not in his wheelhouse. But he has such a phenomenal way of capturing the energy of the place that it doesn't matter because most of the surf photographers, they just want to photograph waves and surfing. And so it's really special to see such a refreshing look and kind of a artistic approach to something that we're so familiar with. It's kind of like, you know, Ardo and the Halls bands of the world, they're showing a very familiar place in a very unfamiliar way. And that's really special.
Yeah, and the one thing that this the way camera and photography has changed so much with the way that we all have iPhones now. Everyone is just so aware of cameras, and everyone's kind of not everyone, but a lot of people like they're curating their own life and they're shooting. Whereas like the book you mentioned, Hall's band, it's like that was back in the day. No one had like digital cameras and shit. So it's just like this the inter human interaction with photography was so different, if that makes sense, I think. And it's like I wish I could kind of go back in time and do that, but now it's like I guess it's a good and bad. It's like good, okay, we're documenting so much more now, but at the same token, it's like everyone's so hyper aware of like photography now and like with social media and whatnot, you know.
Like it's crazy. Like my friends give me shit. Can I say shit? Is that
Yeah,
on?
you can say whatever fuck you want, man.
Cool. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure. Like like my friends give me shit because like I still have like an iPhone 8
Yeah,
and I just got a new one like 3 months ago.
yeah.
Um and my friend when I was in Hawaii last winter, I had the same phone, but the screen broke, so I got a new one like 3 months ago. And I remember my friend was like, "What are you doing? What is that thing? Like you still have a home button?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man." And I had a backpack. No, in my left hand, I had like whatever the new digital camera was with a 500 millimeter lens. And then my right hand, I had a Fuji GFX 100S, so medium format digital.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there freaking out about an iPhone 8. And I'm like, what are you like? This, here's like a super nice camera and then an even nicer medium format rig. And like,
Hmm.
what do you need a phone for? And I love like it almost like gets to the point like it frustrates people, like when you're in a group chat and everyone's got like the Apple phone and they're all blue messages and there's
And
one
then
person with
someone
green
pops up.
text. What the fuck? So like
That's
I,
me.
I
That's me and my
almost
brother with my dad. He's got Android, and anytime he tries to send us a video, it's like all compressed and shit. We're like, we're gonna buy you an iPhone one of these times.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I'll argue that the camera's better,
Yeah.
but yeah, so you totally get it. But
Hmm.
like I I actually love shooting an image and like if I can, if it's not for work, like not looking at it for a year. Because I feel like over time you gain a different perspective and a different point of view of what that image might mean to you or the significance of it or the importance of it.
Yep.
And that was kind of my approach with the book is like, yeah, we're going to capture surfing. Like if people want to see the best surfing, like here it is. It's
Yeah.
right here. This is what happened today. But like, the world doesn't need to know every morning that Kelly makes pancakes or every morning he's in an ice bath. Like if you ice bath and don't Instagram, like it still happened. It's still cold as shit.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like with this book, I'd say, over half the images have never been seen because we're like, what are we gonna do with them? But what I was gonna say, like with Instagram, what's so weird about it was like last month or the month before, I shot a cover of an editorial magazine of Outside Magazine, and I
Oh wow.
posted it, got a bunch of nice responses, and then the next day I went out and I shot empty waves with a buddy of mine just down the street from my house, and I shot a photo of my feet, and they were all frozen, looked like I think they look pretty, but my wife says they look ugly. But like they're all purple and white and they had like frostbite and stuff. And it got 10 times the engagement. So like iPhone 8 photo of my feet gets like 10 times the engagement of like an international magazine cover. And I'm just like, which is more gratifying and like who is the audience that you're speaking to? So like you really got to make it for you more so than this audience like on Instagram, like in my opinion, it's like people are looking for like recipes or like what happened that day or like someone getting like hit in the nuts with a ball or like,
Gear
you
point,
know,
dude. Anytime, it's so funny. It's like anytime I post like gear, like I did it the other day. I was hanging with my friend Xander, and he had like this camera I never seen before. It was like a 6x7, called like a Plow Bell, and
uh-huh.
I just took a picture of it on my Instagram. I got more traction on that than like same thing. Like I could have posted like some project I've been working on forever. It's like don't give a shit. They're like people love gear, man.
No
It's-
one gives a shit. It's crazy. It's so funny that you say that. And so it's like you kind of have to know your audience. Like you have to know your subject that you're photographing. Like
Yeah.
that's one thing we try to do. Even, spending this amount of time with Kelly, we've crossed paths with some pretty interesting people and at times you take a camera out and snap a photo or two and at times you just let it go and I feel like for me the more I'm around certain people the more I'm actually leaving the camera away and just trying to learn from them and trying to I feel like with photographers it's very easy to hide behind the camera
Hmm.
and kind of not have anything to say and just let let the photos speak, but it's it, I think it's important to bring something, but that's the fine line. It's like you want to bring something to the conversation, but you can't be hyper present unless you're the hyper present person, and that's the personality shots that you're going to get. So I think you just kind of have to like stay true to yourself. And if you're the high energy, like we talked about like Ardo, and in surf photography, there's another photographer named like Steve Sherman
Yeah.
who used to do a lot of documentary photography, and he's got the cool hat, he's got the scarf, he's got the leather, like he's the shit. I love Sherman,
Yeah.
but like you know when he's in the room,
Yep.
and his photos are rad, and he captures these little moments, and then he runs out, and I'm like, man, we're like, I'm staying here another 2 weeks. Like I can't bring that energy into the room all day, otherwise
Yeah.
I'm gonna get the boot real fast.
And that's the cool thing about like photography, like we were talking about pipeline, is just as an example, is there's so many different photographers out there on any given day, but the images are all completely different. Like the way you
Yeah.
shoot it, the way Arta shoots it, it's way different. So that's like the cool thing about it. It's like do it how you do it pretty much. And this, I think that's kind of the key to it a little bit.
It is funny though, because when you take like the lessons that you learn at let's say photographing in a place like Pipeline, more specifically like from the water, you always have to kind of be physically ready, mentally ready, and also, camera capable to capture those images. And then like on the flip side, you work on a commercial shoot where you're on these like Zoom calls for hours and they're debating like what color, I don't know, the jacket should be, and everyone gets so stressed out, and you're like, this is not stressful. Like this jacket's not going to kill you. Like
Yeah.
pipeline will kill you. Pipeline's
Yeah.
terrifying. Like
Yeah.
this is just a problem that
I've
needs to
never
be
gone in the
solved.
water at pipeline. I never will. I'm like, I don't fuck around with that thing, dude.
But it's like I feel like the lessons you learn in heavy water can translate to all different facets of life. And it makes what can be, being on a large commercial set, what seems intimidating, but also it can also be like, hey man, like shooting skating, I've shot it a couple times, and like the ramp's not going to fall on you. I think like as a photographer, the scariest thing about photographing skating is like seeing your friend get hurt and like dealing with those emotions. Like that's much harder than like I don't know. I could be wrong. I don't want to like I don't
Mm,
want to disrespect shooting skating because it is I think having the trust of the athlete to capture those peak moments is like hyper important, and being able to do it again and again on the highest level is a true art and a social art, because like they're not skating for 8 hours a day. I don't think they do the trick and maybe go to another trick, but like it's just gnarly when I don't know. I watch like the stuff Rally does, and like I grew up watching like Danny Way, and I'm just like Mike Blayback's a good friend, and I'm just
yep.
like, dude, what's it like to like watch your friend do really gnarly shit? Like, aren't you like, are you ever like, hey man, maybe like today's
It's
not
probably
your
the same
day?
way they feel about you at Pipeline, like or like the Eddie a couple years ago. That thing was insane. I was like, the fact that those dudes just go out there and surf that is just like mental. Like
And then there were guys swimming. I
it's
swam the day before
yeah,
because I didn't have the credentials to shoot the day of the Eddie, but I shot the day before.
yeah,
And you get to a point and you're just like, man, there's like 50 feet of water out here. Like, and then also, like, you're photographing these guys that are heroes to a lot of people. And like, they eat shit and everyone's looking at them.
yep,
Like, no one's looking for the dude with the little housing.
no,
They just assume you're fine.
yeah,
And so that's a pretty spooky thing to keep in the back of your head. Like if we're in Fiji and I'm photographing Kelly and Kelly wipes out and I go over the falls, everyone's looking for Kelly.
yep.
Like you gotta fend for yourself a little bit. And so you have to, train and be prepared for that, and just be aware that you've got to be prepared for the worst.
Yeah, how do you in those moments, because I'm sure you've had plenty of them, like even myself, the one time I don't go to the ocean a lot. I remember years ago I got stuck in a riptide and I just went full panic mode. Like just like tried to go straight to the beaches, which what you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like gulping water. And like even since then, I've always just been super timid with the ocean. Like I go maybe up to my knees. That's about it. But like in those moments where you're out there, pipeline, wherever in the world, um, how do you keep your cool in situations where you might get stuck in a riptide or like the wave catches you or whatnot? Like, how do you deal with those situations?
I think it comes from just I think confidence comes from having a deep understanding of what it is that you're doing, and then also respect for what could happen. So I think having fear is good, and channeling that fear for positive energy is really good. And also, you do it just by gaining experience. Like, the reason I bring up skateboarding is because I know you have a background in skateboarding,
Yep.
and you've done some rad interviews with a bunch of skate photographers that I really admire. Um, and no one went from like a one stair
Yeah, you
to a
build.
20 stair. You
Yep.
build up,
Yep.
and you start olling off a curb, and then a three stair, and then a five stair, and then whatever. You build up to it, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're like Jamie Thomas doing the leap of faith, and you're just like, oh shit, that didn't work. Let me slow down just a little bit more. And I could have been totally wrong. It was Jamie that did the leap of faith, right?
Yeah, he didn't land it. I think his board broke. Yeah, he's the one who tried it. Yeah, it was like
So
melon grab.
yeah, and so like, at some point that's where you go, okay, I gotta slow down a little bit. And so, water photography is very similar. You start slow, like I started at the local beaches near my house, and then you started just pushing yourself more and more as the waves get bigger and bigger. And then for us, like going to Mexico is very easy, and that's kind of the next step to bigger waves. And then sometimes, like what's happened with me is like I kind of got considered a water guy, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh yeah, he'll swim, he's fine," and
Just
you're just,
toss him out there.
fuck.
Yeah, shit.
There's been like the first time I shot with Kelly, we were laughing about this last week. The very first time I shot with Kelly, not when I shot the portrait. There's a photo in the book, like in one of the opening pages, where he has his hands behind his back. It's like a black and white photo,
Hmm.
and he had it was a photo that ended up getting used as like for his 10th world title. And I was shooting, and it was the very first day. I was so nervous. On the way to the beach, I asked him to pull over, and I like threw up. I like ran in the bushes and threw up. And he's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "Oh, I got food poisoning. I ate something weird last night." And like, it was not food poisoning.
Yeah.
And then we get in the water, and we take these jet skis, and we go like half mile out to sea, and we're shooting. And that wave, I think it was the second or third wave of the day. And then he was on another wave, and I shot it. And as I'm swimming out the back of the wave, I look up, and there's like a 20-foot wave here, and then I have to swim here to get to the safety. And as I'm swimming this way, I see a huge crocodile in the lip of the wave.
Crocodile.
Yeah.
Holy
And I'm
shit.
just like, what the fuck, man?
Oh my
And
God.
so I'm like, I can swim towards this crocodile, or I can swim towards this like 20-foot wave. And like they're both gonna hurt.
Yeah.
And so I swam towards the wave and just got blasted. And it was
Jeez.
just like, here we go. And I remember being underwater, and it dragged me probably 200 yards underwater. And all I could think about was like, don't lose the camera. And like, at least I'm creating distance away from this crocodile, which I
Yep.
didn't know were out there. And then after about 5 minutes, which felt like an hour, the jet ski came way into this estuary and grabbed me and pulled me out. And I look at Kelly, and I'm like, dude, what the fuck was that? Like, you didn't say there were crocodiles? He's like, I didn't think you would have swam. And I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't have.
Holy shit.
And
Uh,
so ever since then, I was like kind of like the water guy, I guess. And so I would just, I don't know, I just ended up getting put in these situations in the water that just like test you like physically and mentally. And a lot of it's just assumption of risk. Like that's the other thing, like at pipeline, like you can swim pipeline with a fisheye all day, and you're
mhm.
gonna get a couple crazy insane photos, but you're pretty limited to the shot that you're gonna get, which is the hero tube shot, which would be like the equivalent of like being at the bottom of a stair set with someone doing some.
And is that because pipeline the wave is so close to the beach? Is that you don't have the depth kind of to maneuver like photographically a little bit?
Well, with a fisheye, which was like kind of like the staple surf photography lens, it's definitely like a peak action moment. And at pipelines, you can either get like the high up in the lip angle, which makes the wave look massive, but the wave's already massive,
Yeah.
or like under the rail, which is like a terrifying wave because the wave's really big. You're at the bottom of the wave. and you're trying to not get hit by the surfer. And then you have to deal with the three waves that are behind it. And hopefully, there isn't a wave behind it. And there's some guys that do that exceptionally well. But then I was like, well, what about all those little quiet moments on the way out to going into the lineup? Or what about once you're in the lineup as the sun's setting and you get a silhouette shot of someone paddling over the wave? And I started looking towards photographers who've been doing it for many, many years. And I noticed, and I was totally guilty of it. Like when I started, it was just like you got to be the fisheye guy because that's like you're the guy if you're the fisheye guy. I was never the guy. Like there were always people ahead of me that were so gnarly in the water,
Yeah.
but I was like kind of consistent. And then I would look back and you're like, okay, man, this guy's been out at Pipeline for 30 years and he's still shooting and he's capturing these amazing images. Like there's something to this too. And they're not going to be swimming in the pit for every wave. And so I ended up trying to just being a little, especially at Pipeline specifically, like being a little bit more selective on lens choice and trying to tell that, capture the feeling of being a Pipeline more so than just that one crazy dynamic image. But you have to be willing to sacrifice, the ego to capture that image in order of doing something a little bit different.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's a full thrill seeker thing. Like I see guys in the water at Pipeline now that are swimming wide angles that are still doing it. And I'm just like, man, it's so scary. Like my hat is off to you. It is like absolutely terrifying to do that. And it's also when you're doing it all the time, you're in this rhythm of it. But like now I'm kind of not spending as much time in very, very heavy surf. And
Hmm.
so going from 2 to 3 foot waves at home to 20-foot surf every couple of months or every month, once a month, every other month, like you you're I don't know, I don't want to say you lose an edge, but you're more aware of your edge. Whereas when you're on the road, like I used to spend like 200 days a year on the road chasing the biggest waves in the world, like you're in a rhythm and like you're good to go and you're very familiar with those risks.
Yeah, definitely. Even like for me with like skateboarding for a long time, that was just my life. I skated all day as much as I could. I skated like a couple weeks ago. I don't skate as much anymore just because, older and life and work and whatever. But it's like, yeah, I was like, man, I don't have that muscle memory. I don't have that snap. It's like at a certain point when I was younger, I was like, I felt more comfortable on my skateboard than I did walking. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And it's like, yeah, like you said, it's like if you're not doing it all the time, it's like you really gotta trust your gut and have a serious conversation with yourself of what you're capable of.
Yeah, and you also have to know what it is that what story you're trying to tell.
Hmm.
And sometimes that is playing the safer card and using a longer lens and being in a little bit deeper water. Like I actually saw like the cover image I just saw for the first time. There's a wide angle shot that I'd never seen that my friend Zach Noyle shot. He shot it with a 16 to 35 millimeter lens, the same image as the cover.
Wow.
And I saw it last week for the first time. And then I shot the cover image with an 85 millimeter lens. And personally, like the risk that he took to get that image was way gnarlier than the risk that I took because I was probably another 15 feet back.
Yep.
And his image looks so big, but personally, I love the compression of a longer lens, how it brings the background closer
Hmm.
and it still shows the size of the wave, if not makes it look a little bit bigger. And it was also slightly safer too. But then there's other times where you know, you can get right in there and capture those moments. So pipelines, it's a spooky wave and people get hurt there every year. So you want to kind of, I have so much respect for pipeline and the lifeguards that dedicate their lives to saving people out there too. Like
That's
they're
the
on a
other thing.
whole
That's the
whole
other
other
thing.
wave.
The first thing I learned, first time going out there, I photographed Dave Wassel for AERP, amazing lifeguard and surfer himself. I didn't realize how, because lifeguards out here, it's a different thing. Like lifeguards out there, they're just such, they are part of the surfing. They're like, they need to be there. They're such an important aspect of the community and what these guys do. Because it's not even just they're pulling out tourists, they're pulling out the best surfers in the world, and they're just
Yeah.
the important, amazing work that they do. But a couple more questions. I'll let you get out of here. I guess looking back at all the years of working with Kelly, one of the greatest surfers of all time, he's accomplished a lot. Is there anything you kind of learned from him, getting to spend so much time around him and collaborate with him?
Yeah. What I learned about Kelly is if you're hyper passionate about whatever it is that you do, and an interesting thing about Kelly is he's always looking forward. Like we were talking about it the other day. I was like, "Hey man, like what do you think about the book? Like are you stoked on it?" He's like, "Yeah, it's really good." He's like, and we both have had some friends say some very nice things about it, but neither one of us have sat down since the first time we looked at it together and looked at it again because it's pretty raw for us. It's like a visual diary of our lives.
Hmm.
Everything in the book is that's what made that's just what made the cut. Like there's hundreds and hundreds of days of time spent together and some have photos, some do not, that were made in between those moments. And like I think what I've learned from him is he he really cares about people and he really cares about his friends and he really cares about family. And for the amount of success, both professionally and personally, he's had, if you look at his tight group of friends, like he has a really tight group of friends. I'm honored to be in that circle along with my wife and a few of our friends, but that circle's it's pretty close. And like when we were first traveling early on together, he'd already won 9 world titles, and we would go to Australia and we'd stay with a family. And we go to South Africa and we stay with a family. It's he has a lot of personal relationships with people that he really cares about where he can just be himself. And we would show up to Australia and they're like, "Who made your favorite lasagna?" And he was way more excited about the lasagna than he was about winning the contest that day. And I think that's a testament to the time he spends with the people he loves. And even though he doesn't get to see them all the time, it's kind of like that lasting impression with that tight-knit circle of friends. He's also always prepared. He doesn't show up to a swell with one surfboard, one set of fins, and one pair of shorts and hope for the best. Like he's in the water and he's already thinking about the surfboard he's riding and how he could better improve the next version of that, similar to when he made the first wave. The very first day after he rode the first day of the wave pool, he's already thinking of ways to improve that wave technology. And we're talking like marginal gains, like marginal differences. And I feel the same way with my photography is I'll make an image that I think is nice and I'll immediately tear it apart and go, how can I do a better job? Or what could I have done differently? Or you think more about the images that you don't make, but at the same time, he's always he does always take the time to sit and have a conversation with someone, even if it's a total stranger, if the timing's right. Not if you're at dinner and someone comes up to you at dinner and asks
Yeah.
a photo, but like, if you're in the setting at the beach and someone asks a genuine question, like he'll take the time to answer a question. He's always with the fans, he's always like the last one to sign all the autographs. Like he does really care about his fans and his people, but at the same time, like he just loves surfing. And I think that's kind of what I've learned is like if you love something so much, you can shape your life around it and at times turn it into a career and at times um, have a little bit of like I guess success. But for us, like we were joking about it, like the fact that like when we made this book, for example, like I was on the phone with the publisher, Rizzoli, and I was in the airport and I had to hang up the phone because I had to put my phone through the scanner at TSA to get on a plane because we were chasing a swell to Fiji. And then when I got through my bags, once my bags got through the search, I'm like, okay, go to print, like we're good to go. And like the people at Rizzoli were so kind to us because like I'm sure we were a nightmare to work with because the whole time that we were making this book, like we were traveling, like we were chasing
Can't
waves.
can't get a
This
hold
what
of you. Yeah.
yeah, like I'm sure we were a pain in the ass and we were super indecisive. And actually, on the skating front, um, the designer of the book is this designer named Mackie Saturday,
Okay.
who's based out of New York. You should check his work out.
Yeah.
And he was like a full-on, like he's a diehard skater. He surfs, but he's a dedicated skater. And like he and his work partner Amanda, like we would like be texting back like video sequences of like Gons. Like there's this
No.
rad like footage of, like Gons in like the white room where he's like going. There's like the new one and then the old one that was like 20 years ago. Like we
Mm-hmm.
were like texting that alongside like, hey, did you get that font for the forward that we did and that kind of stuff. And so like how cool that as a result of photography, we're like getting to be in the room with some incredible people and get to work with some incredible talents, but also like have real one-on-one interactions with a lot of people's heroes.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess to wrap up, we're a couple weeks and going to be into a new year. What's next for you? Anything you're excited about moving forward?
Yeah, so we're I actually have a shoot. I'm leaving in like 3 days. I've got a shoot over in Europe for a week, which I'm really excited about and going somewhere new that I've never been before. And then we're gonna do a book. We've been doing these like book slideshows that Kelly and I have been hosting together, where we're doing one in Cocoa Beach, Florida, in his hometown, where like we build a slideshow and then he and I narrate it together. And so that should be a lot of fun. And then we're having our first art show for the book in January, January 11th in Santa Monica at a gallery called the Adler Smith Gallery.
Nice.
So that's going to be really cool. I actually just dropped the prints off to the framer. We have like these 17 really large prints. They're all limited edition. And um, I don't know, like what's so neat about Kelly is like he's a full fan of the arts. Like you go to his house and he has like Julian Schnabel books and he has
Mhm.
all these like he has this huge Sage Vaughn piece that hangs over the bed. Like he's into art, and I think that's why we connect so well. Is like there's a lot of surf photographers that are very good at surf photography, but that's kind of all they know. And it's like we talk about music, we talk about all sorts of stuff, and that those conversations are kind of what inspire us to keep making new work because we're always trying to look at different aspects of like art, culture, history, travel, and apply that to what it is that we're doing in our day-to-day lives. And I just kind of got to keep the batteries charged to push the button when the time's right.
Nice, man. Well, I look forward to seeing what you capture next. And thanks so much for taking the time to do this, Todd.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. I really appreciate it, man. And yeah, let us know if you come out to California. Would love to meet you in person. It'd be great.
So there you have it. That was the Todd Glaser interview. Just want to thank Todd so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. It's a real pleasure talking to him about his journey with photography, as well as his new book that he did with Kelly Slater. Can't recommend it enough. If you want to grab a copy, you can go to Todd's website at tglaser.format.com, or you can go follow him on Instagram at Todd Glaser. I'll put all his links in the description of this episode, but definitely go check out his book. It's really amazing, this body of work over the course of 15 years. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, with this episode, if you use the promo code BANTER, you'll get 2 months free of the PicDrop image transfer tool. So definitely go check it out. All you got to do is go over to picdrop.com, enter the promo code BANTER, and you'll get 2 months free. As always, thanks so much for listening, and take care.